Hi, my name's Laura, and today we're going to cover some of our dry bean on-farm network trial results. This is a recap of some of the things we talked about at the dry bean meetings in Portage and Altona in 2024. Before I get into it, why consider on-farm research on your farm? This is a really valuable tool to test out new products or practices on your field using your own equipment and existing management practices. How will these fit into your own farm operation? We can really fine-tune some of these input decisions you're making. So for dry beans, for example, what nitrogen rate is the most economical? Will that inoculant or biological product actually perform in my field? Those kinds of questions. There's a lot we can test here. It does take a little bit of a time commitment, but there's some really valuable results that can be gained here. The other thing this on-farm research helps us do is gain some confidence in these research results at the field scale and how these are actually going to perform in the farm environment once we introduce some field scale variability. In these small plot research trials where a lot of our recommendations come from, we can test a lot of things in a lot of detail, but it is a very small uniform area. What happens when we actually take it to the field scale and introduce some of that field variability and our own field size equipment and those kinds of things? So how do we actually perform on-farm research? Here we're harvesting a navy bean trial. Let's get into that. So a lot of times when you want to just test out a product on your field, you might have been given a jug of chemical or something. The first knee-jerk reaction might be to do split a field in half, compare the left to the right throughout the season and keep an eye on that. We don't really recommend that or consider that an on-farm test just because it's really easy to skew that data that's coming out of there. There's a lot of things that can emerge when you're splitting a field in half, like at this image in the background. Here we've got old crop history differences showing up in these two crops over time, but other things like your different soil zones in the field can emerge, slope changes throughout the field or drainage. There's a lot of things that can really compound splitting a field in half. So the way we do this or eliminate this is by replicating field scale strips and randomizing those to eliminate any bias. So here's another example. If we split this NDVI image of this field in half, whatever was put on the right would obviously be given a poorer chance to succeed just because a good proportion of that is actually going to impact that side of the field. But when it comes to these field scale strip trials, what we do is each treatment gets a full strip, and then it's replicated 4 times throughout the field so we can gain a lot of confidence in the data we're actually generating here. And then we've also got a randomization on whether this orange or this blue is occurring at these different positions, just to eliminate any bias. For example, if there was a slope here and we had them all on the same size or same side of the replicate there, we'd be introducing a little bit of that bias and be a little less confident in those results. So replication, randomization, 2 key things. The other part of this is really illustrating where you put this trial in your field is also going to be quite important. We're not going to establish it where in this part where we've got a poor producing area where we can have quite a bit of that variability in there. Some field variability is definitely fine. We just want to make sure that it is consistent across the trial so that we're comparing apples to apples. There are some things we've done on our end in the past just to, if something has been kind of skewed out of proportion, there are things we can do, but we do want to think about where in the field we're putting this trial to set it up for success. So using an example, here is a field of navy beans where we had an inoculant trial this last year. So site considerations, we're avoiding the field edges as well as the headlands. Here we've got kind of a run cutting this field in half. That's where the trial ends. And here's what the actual trial kind of would have looked out like if you laid it out. So this pass had inoculant and then coming back around, no treatment, no inoculant product included. And then it's replicated 4 times in the field, just varying which pass is untreated or which has that inoculant. This is a replicated and randomized design, which is letting us gain a lot of confidence in the data and also eliminating any bias. There's also things that we can do though, looking at a fungicide trial now, to really respect your time at these busy times of year. Things we can do to simplify that trial a little bit while still gaining a lot of confidence in those results. So here for this fungicide trial, it's just 2 spray passes, drove right up the middle here, and then came and drove right down the middle here. And then what we've done on our end is split those plots in half. So we've got that replication, and we can compare it to these untreated reps as well. But we do lose a little bit of that randomization, which means where we put this in the field becomes more important. This water run is pretty even throughout the trial, but if that was just a pond right here, that would obviously be something that we'd be considering because it's so much easier to introduce bias here without that randomization. The other reason this works really well is your sprayer's wider than your combine, and this just needs to be the width of one combine pass. So simplifying that a little bit as well. So after that trial has been established, that's when we come in for data collection. So we're doing this on your behalf. Every trial does get flown for NDVI imagery during the summer. So here, for example, if we're testing nitrogen rates in dry beans, it's supposed to produce a darker, leafier green plant. Do we actually see that when we use these vegetative indices? For inoculant and nitrogen trials, we're also assessing nodulation. What kind of biological nitrogen fixation can we actually see on farm in these dry beans, and does our treatment have any effect on that? Every trial also gets plant counts, just what kind of plant stand are we even working with and working within that. And then new this year, every trial where that management decision might have an effect on the lowest pod height, we're starting to record that. So nitrogen rate trials, for example, here we're recording the height of that lowest pod in terms of can we improve harvestability of these crops. And then you're brought back in for harvest here, where we are taking a single combine pass out of every strip. And here in this photo in the background, we've got kind of your normal normal field harvest happening. And then here is this trial harvest in the front where we've actually taken a cut in. So we've got some space to turn around here. And then each of these passes is a different treatment where we're just taking that one combine width out of the plot pass there. This is also that same inoculant field that I showed earlier for reference. And then after each of those strips are combined, they are weighed individually using a weigh wagon or a grain cart. We're also taking moisture samples here to correct for moisture at the end of the day. Occasionally some quality testing samples will also be taken if we're expecting anything to be kind of impacting the quality of the seed overall, some of those things. And then after harvest, we take all that data we collected, all that harvest data, and we summarize it, statistically analyze it, and then perform an economic analysis on it. So that's what's shown on this report that's given to the farmer at the end of the season. We have some background agronomics, the NDVI imagery, some weather data, the actual nodulation ratings, yield, and then also an assessment of the economics. So here, since we didn't see a yield response, we're reporting a negative change in profit because of the cost of that inoculant application. So that's what the farmer is getting, but there's a lot we can learn from, the aggregated network of these results. So here's our actual research reports database, where all of those individual site reports are available publicly. So we've got this database filtered by dry bean inoculant trials. It will generate a map of where in the province those trials occurred, and you can click on those to get a little bit more information about all of them, or you can scroll past that to see a snapshot of all of these trials lined up, where they were, any yield differences, and then there is a link to those single site reports, those 2-page reports that I just showed, for you to access if you'd like to explore this further. We also take all of these results and compile them for presentations like this, where we share what does it look like across the trial as a whole. And you can find those on YouTube, but also in person at various events throughout the year. So with that, let's get into some of these dry bean trial results. We have had 34 trials across Manitoba. The background layer of this map is color-coded based on the 5-year average harvested acres for dry beans in the province. So basically, the darker blue it is, the more dry bean acres that are in that area. And then all of the orange dots are where we've had trials so far. So fungicide trials has been the most common one. We've hosted 19 of those. And then there's also been nitrogen rates, inoculant products that are available to us. We're testing those on farm. Different biological products, just have had one of those. And then comparing strip till versus conventional till. Starting with fungicide applications, let's just run through those piece by piece. So the fungicide applications become kind of an important decision for us in dry beans because white mold is our main target disease for these fungicide applications. It's also that these fungicides are purely preventative to this disease, meaning we have to make that application before we actually know if we're going to have that disease in the field, if we're going to have some of these conditions for it to really develop. So it's purely based on a risk assessment of how humid it is around flowering. Do we have some crop rotation risks in the past where we've noticed white mold that we're considering? But if you're not familiar with this disease, we do have lots of information on it. Basically, you'll end up with kind of bleaching of different stems. There may be mold growth if it's been more humid. Some of these might even be quite soggy feeling. And then you'll end up with these hard black sclerotia bodies developing both on the plant and also inside the stem if you break open those bleached stems. Those sclerotia bodies are what the disease is overwintering in the soil as over time. So they are what's carrying that disease forward into your other broadleaf crops. When we look at some of the disease survey data that's collected in mid to late August each year by Ag Canada researchers, for the last 5 years, we're seeing pretty big swings in how many fields are actually infected with white mold across the province, totally dependent on moisture year to year. So we are seeing anywhere from 3 to 56% of dry bean fields with a white mold infection come late August. And then within those infected fields, anywhere from 0.3 to 6.5% of that actual leaf material infected in the field. So kind of a low to moderate infection overall, despite some pretty big swings year to year in moisture. And then in the past 5 years, anthracnose and rust have not been detected in this disease survey, but they would also be targets of fungicide applications that we will be looking at. It's just that we haven't really seen them as much lately. So getting into the trial results, here are where those fungicide trials occurred. 18 trials have compared a single application of fungicide versus none at flowering. And then one trial in 2021 did compare a single application versus 2 apps. But if you'll remember 2021 being that drought year, not the best time to test 1 versus 2 apps in dry beans. We didn't see a yield response there, so I'm not going to talk about that trial too much. We're going to focus on these single versus none, making that fungicide decision during some drier conditions. Do we see a return on investment? These fungicides were all applied at early pin bean stage, following label recommendations, but research from North Dakota is showing us that we can kind of adjust that timing of that application and maybe get a little bit more bang for our buck than we've been seeing so far. Some background agronomics on these on-farm trials and looking at the single versus none. 7 navy bean trials, all T9905s. 10 pinto bean trials, mostly windbreaker and vibrant with 1 lumen trial, and then a single black bean trial as well. Plant stands anywhere from about 70 to 80,000 plants per acre. The majority of these have been on 30-inch rows with 2 on more intermediate rows. And then the majority of these have used Lance as the fungicide product, followed by Cotegra, Acapella, or Proline Gold. And that early pin bean stage fell anywhere between July 13th and 27th since these trials started. 14 days after application, we're in there evaluating disease pressure in these fields. So we're looking for both foliar and stem anthracnose, rating for that, as well as white mold, looking for that quite a bit. Bacterial blight complex, so common bacterial blight, your bacterial brown spot, halo blight. We are taking note of those, but since our fungicide products don't have activity on a bacterial disease, we're really not going into that in too depth. If you were to be testing, some of those copper products or something that is expected to have efficacy on a bacterial disease, that would be a different story. But just so you're aware of that. And then we're also now revisiting these trials in late August for a second disease assessment. Since this fungicide application for white mold is largely preventative, are we seeing that at the end of the season where we're seeing lasting effects of having protected those flower blossoms earlier at flowering, really prevented that disease longer term from setting in? We're trying to capture some of that as well. So looking at disease pressure in these trials as well as rainfall, only 6 of these trials actually had normal to above normal rainfall for the year. So overall, they were quite dry. At those trials where we did have more moisture, the disease wasn't present. So we need both pieces of the puzzle. The disease has to be present. Those sclerotia need to be in our soil. And we also need the humidity for that disease to develop. So at the sites where we had the humidity, we didn't have the disease. And then at 44% of these trials, we did have the disease, but they were largely on the drier side, so we don't have big infections. Less than 20% of plants were infected at those trials where we did see white mold. Most of the time was actually less than 5%, but there was 2 or 3 trials that had a little bit higher infection rates. And then on average, those dry beans that did receive a fungicide app did see fewer plants with symptoms, 4% on average reduction, anywhere from 1 to 10%, though, was noted in these trials where those fungicides did provide some protection here. What did that mean in terms of a yield response, though? The single application of fungicide at that early pin bean stage only actually increased dry bean yield 11% of the time, on average by 170 pounds per acre. So that yield increase has been large enough to pay for that cost of fungicide and provide us with a return on investment. It's just that it's not happening very frequently. 90% of the time, we're actually not seeing a yield response, meaning we're seeing an overall loss in profit equivalent to that fungicide cost when we map it out. So there's certainly things we can do to fine tune this fungicide decision in dry beans. Largely around white mold, since we're targeting that, it's doing that risk assessment at flowering, taking a look, do we have warm, humid conditions leading up to flowering? Do we get a couple inches of rain around flowering as well? Do we really have those conditions for development? Do we have thick, dense plants canopies? Is there a lot of leaf material there? Are the rows open or are they closed? Because if they're closed, we've got a longer dew period. There's more moisture being retained below those leaves. And then we also need that disease risk. Are we on rotations with other susceptible crops, canola being a big one, sunflowers, soybeans? And think about that last broadleaf crop in that field. What did it have for a white mold infection? That's going to inform how much of that sclerotia is living in the soil for you to potentially result with some disease in this dry bean year if you've got that humidity. So bring those factors together, really consider your risk, and that'll help fine tune that decision. North Dakota Michael Wunsch's program also has some really wonderful research coming out for fungicide timing and different spray applications for managing white mold and dry beans. So fungicide application timing, that's based on canopy closure. Are your rows open or closed? Because if they're open, we can delay that app until most of our plants have pin bean pods, rather than targeting that early pin bean and get a little bit more out of it. If the rows are closed, that's another story. We've got more humidity there. We're going to want to go in a little bit earlier. It's also fine-tuned, droplet size, water volume, and has done some comparative efficacy of different fungicide products. So there are different trade names in the state. So if you're looking at some of that efficacy products, it would be valuable to have your guide to crop protection beside you. Make sure you're comparing active ingredients versus trade names, just because there is a little bit of changeover there. That takes us into nitrogen rates. We've had 6 on-farm trials testing nitrogen rates across the province. There's a little bit overlap of these dots here. Anywhere from 0 to 140 pounds of nitrogen per acre applied has been tested in navy, pinto, and black beans over the years. While these were going on, we also had 2 small plot nitrogen rate studies that were also ongoing. So Kristen McMillan's work from 2017 to 2019 at Carmen over here and Portage de la Prairie. And then also Ramona Moore's at Ag Canada had sites in 2021 and 2022 at Melita, Brandon, and Carberry. Their research has continued on and is still ongoing. So even though these years end here, that's where the data I'll present has ended towards the end, but these are ongoing and we are still investigating this further. So right into the on-farm network results, here we have our nodulation ratings for each of these clusters of bars. Is an individual on-farm trial. We've got the nitrogen rates tested along the bottom, which year it was, and then also the variety tested at each of these on-farm trials. Basically, the darker the blue bar, the higher the nitrogen rate. These beans haven't been inoculated. They're just going into fields that a lot of cases have a history of dry beans, and we're often finding actually really good to excellent nodulation ratings on farm. Often seeing more than 15 nodules per plant in a lot of these cases, the exception being at these black bean trials in southwest Manitoba. We're not seeing as much of a nodulation response here. Some of that might have to do with the history of dry beans in that field. Have they seen quite a few dry bean crops like some of these other fields? Maybe they're delayed, or it could just have to do with the soil characteristics and how that supports rhizobia surviving. But the interesting thing here is We haven't inoculated dry beans in the past, but we do have a lot of rhizobia that live in our soils. And these dry beans have been associating with that rhizobia population in our soil, selecting for those rhizobia species that do want to form an association with dry beans, form these nodules, fix some nitrogen, and that's all just about repeated exposure of the crop, which is really quite interesting. When we look at, the effect of nitrogen, let's go back one. All right, so when we look at the effect of nitrogen on this nodulation in the field on farm, 70 pounds per acre applied, that appears to be that tipping point. Some of them we've still got good nodulation ratings at that level, and then some of them that's where we start to see nodulation really dropping off, that 70 pounds Ven per acre. We're going to take into account residual soil nitrogen right away here, but that really seems to be that tipping point past which we're seeing a drop off of nodulation. Because these bean plants become lazy. If there's more free nitrogen in the soil, they're not going to make that effort to form these nodules. Now that takes us into some of the yield results for each of these trials. So now we just have yield on the side. Let's work through this kind of trial by trial. So at the first trial in 2019 in these navy beans, we saw a 13% yield increase with the applied 140 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Pintos this year, or that year, we had an 8% increase with both 70 and 140 pounds of N per acre applied. Since we saw that yield gain with the 70 pounds, we're going to kind of focus on that one. In 2020, we're really seeing this kind of effective environment emerge where we're not seeing a response in the black beans, and then we're actually seeing a negative yield response with 105 pounds of nitrogen per acre applied. And what was going on there with that kind of environmental effect is this higher nitrogen rate just resulted in these plants that put on a lot of vegetative growth, didn't really want to switch over to reproductive growth. That vegetative period just really drew on, and it kind of affected maturity a little bit. And some of those things are what we were seeing at that trial. So a bigger effective environment in 2020. In 2021, having that drought year, we are seeing some lower yields here, but we're seeing a 14% yield increase with 70 pounds of nitrogen per acre applied. And then in 2023, this last year in these black beans, 17% yield increase with 85 pounds of nitrogen per acre applied. So what we're seeing here is applying about 70 pounds of nitrogen per acre, increasing yield 8 to 17% at half of these on-farm trials. But this environment is playing a pretty big role in how beans are responding to the nitrogen rates applied. Here on this slide, we've actually done an economic analysis. So this is our return on nitrogen investment using different nitrogen pricing for 2019, 2020, and then higher nitrogen pricing in 2021, 2023. Same also reflected in our change in bean price over those years. How we actually have calculated this is up in the top right corner. But basically, are we seeing a return on investment for this increased nitrogen cost? This has been statistically analyzed, and what we see is that it comes out in the wash. We're not seeing a consistent return on investment with these higher nitrogen rates applied, despite seeing some of those yield bumps earlier. Of course, in that trial where we had that negative yield response, we're also seeing a significant negative economic response because we've paid more for this treatment and we've lost yield. We're really seeing that come out here. But overall, what we're kind of seeing is, sorry, the computer's a little mad. What we're kind of seeing is that we're not seeing large enough yield increases to consistently see that return on nitrogen investment when we're looking at the statistics. But here we've got kind of the comparison of where we did see those yield bumps. What dollar amount was that change, even though it wasn't significant? So anywhere from $10 to $30 increase with these higher nitrogen rates, or these 70-pound nitrogen rates. And then at that drought condition kind of year, we're actually seeing that loss where that yield increase wasn't enough to pay for it. But when we do run that economic analysis, we are finding that that zero nitrogen treatment is providing us just as much of a return on investment as actually applying nitrogen. Let's move into some of the small plot research results, starting with Ramona's at Brandon, Carberry, and Melita in 2021-2022. Here are all the aggregated yield results for the different nitrogen rates she tested. But what she was finding was black bean yield tended to increase with increasing nitrogen rate, while pinto bean yield was less responsive. She also had a separate irrigated trial where rates above 70 pounds of nitrogen per acre increased white mold pressure. So that's another important consideration. And again, we're hearing that 70 pounds of N per acre number coming up. When we look at Kristen's results from 2017 to 2019 at Carmen and Portage and Pintos and Navies, averaged here. She touched on these last year at the driving meeting in quite detail. So this is just maybe a little bit of a refresher for what happened there. She was seeing a 17% yield increase with rates of 140 pounds of nitrogen per acre applied. But again, when she ran that economic return to nitrogen investment, it was the same across treatments where we're not seeing an economic optimum or emerge from applying nitrogen. What we are seeing is that 0 pound nitrogen applied is providing the same economic return as applying nitrogen, where we're not seeing really much of a response there. So that leads into some different options we have when we're thinking about nitrogen strategies on our farms. The first one is to do nothing. So on average, these 0 nitrogen applied treatments did yield 1,800 pounds per acre on farm. And what we're seeing there is, some of that biological nitrogen fixation is coming in, the soil supplying some of that nitrogen, but there is an opportunity to just do nothing and see how it goes. This is going to maybe have a little bit more success on those fields that do have some dry bean history, where you might have some of those rhizobia that can perform some biological fixation for you. Another option you have is to fertilize to a total of 70 pounds of nitrogen per acre. So that's including your soil residual N and any nitrogen applied. Using Kristen's results, you can expect 93% maximum yield here, just adding kind of 35 pounds of N per acre applied, accounting for about 35 in the soil, using your soil test to kind of fine tune that. Another option that appears to be kind of emerging from some of these on-farm research results is fertilizing to a total of 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre. So doing that 70 pounds of N applied with about a 30 pound per acre residual. So that's where we were seeing kind of still getting some nodulation occurring. Maybe not peak nodulation as you would find with the 70 pounds of N per acre, but we're also seeing pretty good yield returns, even though they're not an economic return. The overall 100 pounds of N per acre, that's our current soil fertility guideline. Some of the research from North Dakota is also circling around that number as well. So that's another option to present. And then the fourth would be this inoculation. So as inoculant products become more common, we can do this with or without supplemental nitrogen. The unfortunate part is we don't have a ton of products available currently in dry beans for inoculating dry beans. So we do want to test those products that are coming to the market. Let's see some consistent results. And then maybe this will become an option for us down the future. I mentioned this earlier, but the nitrogen rates research is continuing. Testing nitrogen rates in combination with available inoculant products is going to be happening with both Kristen and Ramona are working together at sites across Manitoba here. And we'll continue testing this on farm with any interested farmers. So please do reach out to us if you want to chat a bit more about what that would look like. That takes me into testing out those inoculant products. What is available to us? Can we actually improve some of this biological nitrogen fixation in dry beans with the products that we have available? Diving into that a little bit more on farm. So this started in 2019, where we did have one trial comparing Boss peat inoculant in pinto beans versus untreated beans. Here we didn't see any significant results in terms of nodulation differences or yield differences. So overall, we are seeing a loss in profit of about $5 per acre for that Boss peat inoculant, just because we're not seeing that return on investment. And then in 2023, we tested AgTiv Fuel and AgTiv Thrive at a couple different farms in Navy blacks and kidney beans. And we here again aren't seeing any differences in nodulation or yield. So we're seeing a loss in profit of about $5 for fuel and then $18 for Thrive, which has an extra biological product, mycorrhizal product worked into that. So we will keep testing those products as they become available, because we do want to find something that we can support some of this nodulation growth on farm. Another research project that's ongoing at the University of Manitoba with Dr. Ivan Resnick is actually developing an effective inoculant for dry beans. So to support this research this last year, we collected soils from 40 different dry bean fields in Manitoba, some of these on-farm trial fields included, targeting some of those fields that had some dry bean history. Can we actually develop an inoculant from the rhizobia that are forming nodules already with these dry bean plants on farm? So far, they've isolated more than 200 rhizobia strains. So this research is in progress, and we'll keep a keen eye on it as it progresses to see what we kind of might be able to develop out of it. That takes me into biological products for dry beans. We did have a single trial evaluating Invita applied at R2 versus untreated pinto beans in 2022. And here, no significant differences between treatments. So we are seeing a loss in profit of about $15 per acre with that Invita application. If there are biological products that you're exploring on your farm, we do recommend an on-farm test. Just let's build some confidence that these products are working and doing as advertised or performing as advertised before we put them on every acre. Because there are a lot of different biological products out there. They might claim to improve soil health, plant uptake of nutrients. There's a lot of different things. So let's test them on farm and see some repeatable results here. And with that, I just want to close with some pictures from strip till versus conventional till. There's been 3 trials in central Manitoba comparing these in pintos and black beans. And the interesting part to me from 2020 and 2021 when we did these is we're really seeing moisture conservation and soil protection benefits at all 3 of these trials, resulting in economic gain. So the strip till starting off had better snow catch, so we are capturing a little bit more moisture here. And then in 2020, 1 week after a very major windstorm in June came through, that's what these pictures are from, had that major windstorm, saw quite a bit of sandblasting. So you can see some of those old sandblasting injuries on these strip till beans. They're growing through it, no trouble. This residue thatch layer really did protect quite a bit of that soil from blowing, versus the conventional till beans where they were just shredded. They're struggling to regrow here. All of that wind picked up these soil particles and just really sandblasted these beans. Here there was an economic loss in profit because these beans actually needed to be reseeded. The damage was that great. So even though there wasn't any yield differences, we're seeing a change in profit just because these had to be reseeded, which is quite expensive. In 2021, had black beans and pinto beans, just in the background strip versus the conventional till here. In the black beans, we saw those moisture conservation benefits in this drought here in 2021, increasing yield by almost 300 pounds per acre. In pinto beans, we actually couldn't harvest the conventional till strips since they didn't mature. So if you'll remember 2021, some of these bean fields, growth just kind of paused because there wasn't any moisture. So they just stopped growing. And then we caught a rain and they started growth again. But that growth was largely vegetative. It was prolonged into the fall. And some of that was happening at this trial here. So the strip till just kept carrying on. We were able to harvest that as normal, but we never really were able to get into the conventional till strips. So we saw an economic loss there as well because couldn't harvest them. So that's just kind of a little bit of a story in pictures of the strip till versus conventional till. If anybody's interested in testing this out further, we'd love to support that. Just reach out to us. And then I'd also like to invite you to join us August 7th. That's a Wednesday morning at the Morden Research Center, Ag Canada's research center there for a dry bean tour. We're hoping to tour some of the co-op trials and the different varieties they've been working on. That's where our lead dry bean breeder is located, and we're going to take a look at some of his work. And we've also got some pathologists, disease folks that we'll chat with as well. So please mark that in your calendars, and there'll be more details as we get closer too. So thanks for your time. I've been Laura presenting this. If you're in central or eastern Manitoba, Jen is my eastern counterpart. Her contact information is here. If you'd like to discuss any of these trials further, here's Chris's contact information. He coordinates some of these trials. And then here's a QR code link to that on-farm results database. If you want to check out any of these results a little bit more, you can follow us on Twitter or YouTube for some of these summaries and some of these little tidbits from the on-farm network over time. So thank you.